Welcome to Inside the Philippines. I'm your host, and today we're sharing a story that's going to make you think twice about the old saying that learning someone's language is the key to their heart. This is Grant's story. He's a 61-year-old baker from Christchurch, New Zealand, a quiet bloke who spent 40 years perfecting his craft, then sold up and found himself with decent money in the bank, but absolutely nothing to fill the emptiness. When he met a Filipina woman who seemed different from all the stories he'd heard, Grant was determined to prove he wasn't like those other expats. He'd do it right. He'd learn the language, embrace the culture, become part of the family. And he did learn the language. That's the problem. Because sometimes understanding what people are really saying about you when they think you can't understand them, that's a curse, not a gift. What Grant discovered through his new language skills changed everything. And what happened next is a cautionary tale about the cost of trying to prove you're special. Here's his story, in his own words. My name's Grant, and I'm sitting here in a flat in Christchurch that's about half the size of what I had before I met Maricel. I'm 62 now, and I'm working the 3 a.m. shift at someone else's bakery because I can't afford not to. That's what 70 grand worth of lessons costs, mate. Not language lessons, though I paid for those too. Life lessons. The expensive kind. Let me back up. For 40 years I ran a corner bakery here in Christchurch. Same shop, same routine, same 3 a.m. Alarm every bloody morning. I'd be in there mixing dough while the rest of the city was still asleep. And I loved it. There's something honest about baking. You follow the recipe. You get the result. Temperature matters. Timing matters. You can't rush good bread. My customers knew me, relied on me, and for a long time that felt like enough. But while I was perfecting my sourdough starter, life was happening to everyone else. My mates from school were granddads by the time we hit 60. They'd show me photos of grandkids on their phones down at the pub, talk about family barbecues and school plays and all the normal things that come with building a life with someone. I'd smile and nod and buy another round, but inside I was doing the math on how completely I'd cocked it up. There was this girl, Sarah. We were together when I was 25, 26. I thought she was it, Thought we'd get married, have kids, do the whole thing. But she met someone else, a lawyer, made better money than a baker ever would, and that was that. She chose him. I told myself I'd get over it, that I'd meet someone else. And I tried. God knows I tried. But every woman I dated after Sarah, I measured them against her. Against what could have been. And they all came up short. Eventually, I stopped trying. Easier that way. Less disappointing. At 60, I sold the bakery. Got a decent price for it. Between the sale and my pension, I had about $130,000 in the bank. I moved into a smaller flat, thinking I'd enjoy retirement. Travel a bit. Maybe take up fishing or golf or whatever retired blokes are supposed to do. But the silence in that flat was deafening. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning anyway. 4 decades of habit don't just switch off. And I'd lie there in the dark with nothing to get up for. No dough to mix, no ovens to fire up, no customers expecting their morning bread. Just me and the cricket on the telly and my phone, scrolling through Facebook looking at other people's lives. My mates meant well, but their pity was worse than their silence. You could see it in their eyes when they'd invite me to family things their wives had insisted. You know how it is, poor Grant all alone. I'd show up and eat their food and play with their grandkids and drive home to my empty flat feeling more alone than if I'd just stayed there in the first place. I started spending more time online, YouTube, mostly, travel videos, cooking channels, that sort of thing. And I kept seeing these videos about expats living in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines. Blokes my age, older even, living these different lives. Some of it looked dodgy as hell. You could tell what some of them were really there for. But other videos seemed genuine. Nice places, low cost of living, friendly people. The Philippines ones kept catching my attention. Not because of the women or the nightlife or any of that. It was how family-oriented the culture seemed. Multi-generational homes. Everyone looking after each other. Kids respecting their elders. That appealed to me, I'll be honest. Here I was in New Zealand with money in the bank and no one to spend it on, and there were families who genuinely took care of each other, who valued those connections. I watched this one video, some Aussie bloke in a place called Dumaguete University Town, he said. Quieter than Manila, more genuine. He showed the boulevard along the water, the local markets, families out together in the evenings. It looked peaceful, simple. The opposite of my empty flat. So I did something I'd never done before. I booked a flight. Just 2 weeks, I told myself. Have a look around, see what all the fuss was about. Maybe feel something other than this crushing, bloody emptiness for a change. I didn't tell my mates I was going. Didn't want to hear what they'd say. I could already imagine it, jokes about bar girls, warnings about scams, that knowing look like I was some desperate old fool. Maybe I was. But I bought the ticket anyway. The money wasn't the issue. I had plenty saved. It was the other kind of poverty that was killing me. The poverty of purpose, of connection, of someone giving a damn whether you woke up in the morning or not. I'd spent 40 years measuring flour and timing oven temperatures with precision, building something I could control completely. But you can't bake yourself a family. Can't follow a recipe for belonging. I landed in Cebu, then took a small plane to Dumaguete. It was January, middle of their dry season. Even coming off the plane, the heat hit me like opening an oven door. I checked into a small hotel near the university, nothing fancy, just clean and cheap, and spent the first day just walking around, getting my bearings, letting the place sink in. It was different from what I expected, less touristy than I'd imagined. Lots of students because of the university, local families out in the evenings, tricycles buzzing everywhere. The heat was intense, but everyone seemed to just carry on with it. I wandered along the boulevard, watched the sunset, ate at a local place where I was the only foreigner. The food was good. Different, but good. I had no plan beyond existing somewhere that wasn't my flat for 2 weeks. No expectations. And maybe that's why what happened next felt so much like fate. Sweet as, I thought. Just 2 weeks to feel something different. 2 weeks, and then back to real life. Turns out, 2 weeks was just enough time to completely change the rest of my life. Just not in the way I imagined. Day 3 in Dumaguete, I'm wandering around Robinson's supermarket because that's what you do when you're alone in a foreign country. You find the familiar things. Supermarkets, malls, air conditioning. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just killing time before the heat outside became slightly less murderous. They had a small bakery counter near the entrance. Nothing fancy, just the standard Filipino bread, pandesal mostly, some sweet rolls. But old habits die hard, and I found myself standing there examining the pandesal like I was still running quality control at my own shop. Picked one up, squeezed it gently. Too dense. Overproofed, probably. The crust wasn't right either. I must have been muttering to myself because a voice beside me said, in perfect English, "You must be a baker." I turned, and there she was, Maricel. Though I didn't know her name yet. Mid to late 30s, pretty in an understated way, none of that heavy makeup you see on some of the women targeting foreigners. She was smiling at me, genuinely amused, holding a plastic bag with her own pandesal inside. Guilty, I said, probably blushing like an idiot. 40 years in the trade. Can't help myself. What's wrong with it? She asked, nodding at the bread in my hand. And just like that, we were talking. I explained the technical flaws, the overproofing, the density, how New Zealand bakeries would never get away with this texture. She listened, asked questions, told me she'd grown up watching her grandmother make pandesal in the province, but never really understood the science behind it. I'm Maricel, she said, extending her hand. Her English was excellent, barely an accent. I work at a call center here, customer service for an American insurance company. Grant, I replied. Retired baker from Christchurch, here on holiday. We stood there in the supermarket talking about bread for 20 minutes. About yeast activation temperatures and the difference between Filipino flour and what we use back home. About how her grandmother would wake up at 4 in the morning to have fresh pandesal ready for breakfast. Normal conversation. Easy. No hint of anything transactional. When she said she had to get going, needed to pick up her daughter from school, I almost let her walk away. But something made me ask if she'd like to have coffee sometime. Show me around Dumaguete from a local's perspective. She smiled and said yes. We met 2 days later at a place called Hayahai on the boulevard, little outdoor cafe with a view of the water. Maricel showed up in jeans and a simple blouse, no makeup beyond what looked natural. We ordered coffee. She insisted on paying for her own, which struck me as different from the stories I'd heard about Filipinas and foreign men. She told me about her life. Single mother to a 10-year-old daughter named Althea. The father had disappeared when Althea was a baby, some local guy who wasn't interested in being a dad. She'd been raising her daughter alone, working the night shift at the call center because the American hours paid better. Her family lived in the province, about 40 minutes outside the city. She was saving money for Althea's education, trying to give her daughter opportunities she never had. I told her about the bakery, about Christchurch, about how strange it felt to suddenly have all this time and nothing to do with it. I didn't mention Sarah, that felt too heavy for a first proper date, but I talked about the loneliness of retirement, how my mates all had families and I'd somehow missed that boat entirely. She was easy to talk to, laughed at my terrible pronunciation when she taught me basic Tagalog phrases. Salamat for thank you, maganda for beautiful, kumusta ka for how are you. I mangled them all and she found it hilarious. After coffee, we walked along Rizal Boulevard as the sun was setting. The heat had broken slightly and there were families out. Kids on bikes, couples holding hands, old men fishing off the seawall. Maricel pointed out landmarks, told me stories about the city. She'd lived here for 15 years, moved from the province after finishing some college. The call center job wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Paid the bills, let her support Althea. What struck me most was what she didn't do. She didn't ask where I was staying, didn't ask about my pension or my savings or whether I owned property back home, didn't manufacture emergencies or drop hints about needing money, just seemed genuinely interested in talking to this awkward Kiwi bloke who knew too much about proper bread fermentation. When she smiled, really smiled, not the calculated smile you practice for customers, something in my chest shifted. She reminded me of Sarah, not in looks, but in that feeling of possibility. Like maybe I hadn't completely missed my chance after all. We saw each other every day after that. Coffee, walks, cheap dinners at local places where I was usually the only foreigner. She introduced me to Filipino food adobo, sinigang lumpia, taught me more Tagalog phrases. Told me about her daughter's school, her family in the province, her dreams of maybe opening a small business someday. I was supposed to fly back to New Zealand after 2 weeks, but day 12 rolled around and I couldn't imagine leaving. Not yet. I went to the hotel Wi-Fi and changed my flight. Extended my stay to a month. When I told Maricel, she looked genuinely pleased. "You like Dumaguete," she said. "I like the company," I replied, and meant it. Looking back now, I can see what was happening. A lonely man, 61 years old, finally feeling wanted again. Finally feeling like someone was actually interested in him, not just tolerating his presence. The desperation I'd been carrying for decades since Sarah really made me vulnerable in ways I didn't recognize. But in those first weeks with Maricel, I wasn't thinking about vulnerability or red flags or any of that. I was thinking about how she'd throw her head back when she laughed, how she'd correct my Tagalog pronunciation with patience instead of mockery, how she talked about Althea with such obvious love and dedication. I was thinking, this is it. This is what I've been missing. Second chance, fate correcting a 36-year-old mistake. I was thinking, sweet as, finally, something good. The universe, it turns out, has a dark sense of humor about that sort of thinking. We spent that month together and it felt natural. Real. She worked her shifts at the call center and I'd explore the city during the day. Then we'd meet in the evenings. She never asked me for money. Never suggested I pay for her meals, we'd split bills or take turns. She had her own life, her own apartment she shared with a cousin, her own independence. That's what made it feel different, you see. She wasn't some bar girl looking for a sponsor. Wasn't some provincial girl desperate to escape poverty. She was a working professional with decent English and a stable job. Someone who just happened to connect with a retired baker from New Zealand. When I finally flew back to Christchurch at the end of that month, we'd already planned my return visit. 2 months away felt like an eternity. We stayed in touch constantly. Facebook messages, video calls on Messenger. She'd show me Althea doing homework, tell me about her day at work. I'd show her the gray Christchurch winter, complain about the rain. My mates noticed something had changed. I wasn't drinking as much at the pub, wasn't sitting at home all day. I was planning, looking forward to something. When I told them I was going back to the Philippines to see someone I'd met, you should have seen their faces. "Be careful, mate," one of them said. "Those relationships can get complicated." I brushed it off. They didn't understand. This wasn't like that. Maricel was different. We were different. I booked my return flight for April, 3 weeks this time. And Maricel said there was someone she wanted me to meet properly. Her family. The tricycle ride to Barangay Valencia took about 40 minutes from Dumaguete proper. Maricel sat beside me, relaxed, while the driver navigated potholes and chickens with equal nonchalance. The city gave way to rice fields, then small clusters of houses with corrugated metal roofs, dogs sleeping in the road, kids playing barefoot in the dirt, karaoke music bleeding from someone's house at 2 in the afternoon. "My family's simple people," Maricel said, squeezing my hand. "They don't have much, but they're good people. They'll love you." I was nervous as hell. Meeting the family is a big step anywhere, but here in the Philippines it felt weighted differently. I'd read enough online to know that meeting the family often meant you were serious, that you were in it for the long haul. The tricycle pulled up to a modest concrete house unpainted, just raw gray blocks, with a tarpaulin stretched over part of the roof where tiles were missing. Chickens pecking in the dirt yard. A motorcycle with a flat tire propped against the fence. Through the open door I could hear voices, smell something cooking. Maricel called out and suddenly there were people everywhere. Her mother came out first, small woman, maybe 55, wearing a house dress and flip-flops. She took one look at me and burst into tears of joy, grabbed my hands and started thanking me in Tagalog I couldn't understand yet. Maricel translated, "She's thanking God for bringing you to our family." I hadn't even been inside yet, and I was already part of the family apparently. Her father emerged, next quiet man with weathered hands and a shy smile, shook my hand firmly, gestured for me to sit down. Within minutes there was Red Horse beer in front of me and food appearing from the kitchen. Maricel's mother had cooked a feast chicken adobo, pork sinigang, lumpia, rice. Way too much food for what should have been a casual visit. Then came the siblings. Mark, 28, who drove a tricycle for a living. Friendly enough, asked about New Zealand, whether it was true everyone had sheep. Maria, 25, with 2 small kids clinging to her legs. Her husband wasn't around, Maricel explained later. He'd gone to Manila for work. Sent money when he could. And Jen, 22, still in college studying nursing at Silliman University. They called me Kuya Grant right from the start. Big Brother Grant. like I'd already been adopted into the family structure. Althea was there too, Maricel's daughter. She'd been shy around me in Dumaguete, but here, surrounded by family, she opened up, climbed onto my lap, and started teaching me Tagalog words, laughing when I got the tones wrong. Manok for chicken, tatay for father, pamilya for family. The neighbors started showing up. Word had spread that the Kano was visiting. They wanted to see the foreigner, shake my hand, practice their English. Everyone was friendly, curious, welcoming. Not pushy, just genuinely interested in why a New Zealander was sitting in their barangay drinking Red Horse with them. I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Belonging. Purpose. Like I was part of something bigger than just myself, and my empty flat, and my cricket matches on the telly. Maricel's father asked about my work through Maricel's translation. I explained about the bakery, the 40 years of early mornings, the satisfaction of feeding people. He nodded with understanding. He was a farmer, worked his small plot of land, understood physical labor and pride in craft. We didn't need many words to connect over that. The afternoon stretched into evening. More food appeared. The grandmother, tiny woman who must have been 80, held my hand and said something lengthy in Tagalog. Maricel translated, "She says you have kind eyes, that you'll take care of our Maricel and Althea, that this is God's plan." God's plan. I'd hear that phrase a lot over the coming months. I should have been overwhelmed, should have recognized this as moving too fast. But instead, I felt grateful, honored even. These people were welcoming me like I already belonged, like I was already family. When it was time to head back to Dumaguete, Maricel's mother cried again, made me promise to come back soon. Packed leftover food in plastic containers for me to take. Everyone wanted photos, me with the family, me with the grandmother, me with Althea. On the tricycle ride back, Maricel was quiet, thoughtful. Then she said, "They really like you. My mother says you're a blessing." A blessing. That word, too, would come back to haunt me. That visit was in April. I flew back to New Zealand in early May, but we both knew what was happening. This wasn't a holiday romance anymore. This was something real, or at least it felt real. We stayed in constant contact. Video calls every day. Her family would wave at me through the phone. Althea would show me her homework. Maricel would tell me about work, about saving money, about dreaming of a better future. I came back in July for 2 weeks. This time I met extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins. The whole clan gathered to meet Kuya Grant. We went to the beach, to church on Sunday, to a cousin's birthday party, where I was treated like a celebrity simply for being foreign. Maricel showed me her apartment in Dumaguete, the one she shared with her cousin. It was small but clean. 1 bedroom, basic kitchen, shared bathroom. She was embarrassed by how simple it was. I told her it was fine, that I'd started in humbler circumstances myself. She was working hard, saving for Althea's education, trying to build something better. I saw myself in that work ethic, that dedication. That's what bakers do. We show up every day, do the work, build something through consistency and effort. On my last night of that July visit, sitting on the boulevard watching the sunset, I asked her to marry me. It wasn't romantic or planned. No ring, no fancy speech. Just, "Maricel, I think we should get married. I'm not getting any younger and you make me happy. What do you say?" she cried. Said yes. Said she'd been hoping but didn't want to pressure me. Said her family would be so happy. Said this was God's blessing. I came back in September for the wedding. Simple ceremony at the municipal hall in Dumaguete. Maricel wore a white dress from the mall. I wore the only decent shirt and trousers I'd brought. Her family was there, crying happy tears. A local priest said words about God's plan and blessings and the sanctity of marriage. I was 61 years old, getting married for the first time in a country I'd only known for 6 months, to a woman I'd spent maybe 2 months total with in person. My mates back home thought I'd lost the plot entirely. Maybe I had. But standing there in that municipal hall, with Maricel squeezing my hand and Althea grinning up at me and her family beaming with joy, I felt like I'd finally gotten it right. Finally found what I'd been looking for since Sarah left me in 1985. I applied for the 13A marriage visa, the permanent residency you can get when married to a Filipino citizen. Started the paperwork, paid the fees, went through the process. Maricel quit her call center job I encouraged her to, told her she'd worked hard enough, deserved to focus on family now. We rented a nicer apartment in Dumaguete together. 2 bedrooms, better area, $18,000 a month, which came to about 580 New Zealand dollars. Seemed reasonable. My plan was to split time 6 months in the Philippines, 6 months back in New Zealand to see my mates and sort out pension paperwork. Eventually transition to living here full-time. The weather was better, the cost of living lower, and most importantly, I had family now. Purpose. A reason to wake up in the morning. Everything felt right. Like my life had finally clicked into place. Like I'd been stumbling around in the dark for 60 years and suddenly someone had switched on the lights. Sweet as, I thought. I've made it. Finally building the life I was supposed to have. I should have known better than to trust feelings. Should have applied the same precision to my relationships that I'd applied to bread baking. Should have measured carefully, followed proven methods, paid attention to the signs that something wasn't quite right. But I didn't. Because I wanted it to be true too badly. Because the loneliness I'd been carrying for decades made me willing to ignore anything that might threaten this fragile new happiness, and because I'd convinced myself that my story would be different, that we were different, that real love looked exactly like this. Turns out the universe doesn't care what you want to believe. Reality has its own recipe, and sometimes you're just an ingredient getting mixed into something you don't understand yet. The first request came about 2 months after the wedding. We were sitting in our apartment in Dumaguete. Maricel scrolling through her phone while I watched some New Zealand rugby match on my laptop. She got quiet in a way I'd learned meant something was bothering her. "Mahal," she said. "That's love in Tagalog. I need to talk to you about something." My stomach tightened. Here it comes, I thought. But then she explained Althea's school. The public school she'd been attending wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. Overcrowded classrooms, teachers who sometimes didn't show up. Maricel wanted her in St. Paul University, the private Catholic school near the boulevard. Better education, smaller classes, more opportunities. "How much?" I asked. 45,000 pesos per year, she said quietly. "I know it's a lot. Maybe too much. But she's so smart, Grant. She deserves better than what I had." I did the math in my head. 45,000 pesos was about 1,500 New Zealand dollars. For a year of school. That seemed reasonable, actually. Back home, that wouldn't even cover a term at a decent school. "Of course," I said. "She's my stepdaughter now. Her education matters," Maricel cried. Hugged me. Called her mother immediately to share the good news. Within an hour, the whole family knew that Kuya Grant was sending Althea to the good Catholic school. I felt proud. Like a proper father figure. Like I was making a real difference. Looking back now, I can see that was the test. The first request to see if I'd say yes, to establish the pattern. A month later, Maricel's mother needed cataract surgery. Her vision had been failing for years, Maricel explained. The public hospital had a 2-year waiting list, but there was a private clinic in Dumaguete that could do it next month for 80,000 pesos. I didn't even hesitate. My own mum had eye problems before she passed. I remembered how frightened she'd been, how much the surgery had helped. 80,000 pesos was about 2,600 New Zealand dollars. Expensive, but this was family. This was Maricel's mother. The woman who'd welcomed me with tears of joy and called me a blessing. I transferred the money through the bank. The surgery happened. Maricel's mother called me afterward, crying with gratitude, saying prayers in Tagalog. The family posted photos on Facebook of her smiling with bandages over her eyes. Everyone commented, "Blessed. God is good. Thank you, Kuya Grant." I felt like a hero. Like I was finally using my money for something meaningful instead of just sitting on it while it gathered interest in Christchurch. Then Mark lost his tricycle driving job. The owner had sold the tricycle to someone else, and Mark was out of work. He had a wife and a kid to support. Times were tough. Could I help with 15,000 pesos a month, about 500 New Zealand dollars, just until he found something else? It would be temporary. Just a few months. Of course, I said. Family helps family. That's what Maricel always said. That's what family does. The requests kept coming. Never all at once. Always spaced out enough that each one seemed reasonable on its own. The house in the province needed a new roof. A typhoon had damaged it months ago, and the family had been making do with tarpaulins, but rainy season was coming. 180,000 pesos to do it properly. 6,000 New Zealand dollars. That one made me pause. 6 grand was serious money. But Maricel showed me photos of the damage. Water dripping into the house, mold growing on the walls, her parents sleeping in the one dry room. Her grandmother was elderly. What if she got sick from the damp? I flew back to New Zealand, went to my bank, withdrew the money, came back to the Philippines feeling like a provider. The whole barangay turned out to thank me when the new roof went on. Someone organized a small celebration. They roasted a pig. Everyone kept patting my back, calling me generous, blessed, a good man. That's the thing about Filipino gratitude. It's overwhelming. Genuine, maybe, but overwhelming. Every gift comes with tears, prayers, promises that they'll never forget what you've done. It makes you feel obligated to keep giving, because how can you say no after they've made you feel like a saint? Maria's husband left her, just disappeared one day, stopped sending money from Manila. She had 2 kids to feed. Could I help with 8,000 pesos a month for groceries? That was only about 260 New Zealand dollars. Less than I'd spend on groceries for myself back home. Yes, I said. Because what was I going to do? Let kids go hungry? Jen's college tuition was due. 35,000 pesos for the semester. She was studying nursing, Maricel said. Once she graduated, she'd get a good job, help support the family. It was an investment in everyone's future. I paid it. The grandmother got sick, needed 12,000 pesos for the hospital. Of course I paid. She was 80 years old. What kind of monster would I be if I let her suffer? Each request came with perfect timing. Right when I'd start to feel slightly uncomfortable about the money flowing out, something would happen to make me feel like a hero again. Althea would bring home good grades and thank me for her school. Maricel's mother would cook my favorite adobo and tell me I was the son she never had. The family would post photos on Facebook with captions about blessings and answered prayers. And Maricel was affectionate and grateful. She'd curl up next to me at night and whisper about how lucky she was, how she'd prayed for someone like me, how God had brought me to them for a reason. She'd talk about our future, maybe opening a small bakery together, maybe building a house in the province, maybe traveling to New Zealand so I could show her my country. The word that kept coming up was blessing. I was a blessing. The money was a blessing. Everything was God's plan and blessings. Religion is a powerful manipulation tool in the Philippines, looking back on it. The country's about 85% Catholic, and they take it seriously. Everything is framed in terms of God's will, blessings, answered prayers. If you're giving money, you're participating in God's plan. If you stop giving, you're going against God's will. The guilt is built right into the language. But at the time, I bought into it completely. I wanted to believe I was part of something divine, that my loneliness and Sarah leaving me and all those years alone had been leading me to this, to being someone's blessing, someone's answered prayer. By month 12 of marriage, I was sending 40,000 pesos monthly as regular support, about 1,300 New Zealand dollars, rent, groceries for Maricel's parents, Mark's temporary income, Maria's kids, Jen's school expenses, various bits and pieces, plus whatever emergencies came up. And there was always an emergency. Someone's birthday, someone's graduation, someone's medical bill. The house needed repairs again. The tricycle needed new tires. Althea needed school supplies, a new uniform, books. Christmas was coming and there were expectations about gifts for everyone. I'd sit in our apartment doing the math, watching my bank balance drop. I'd started with $130,000. After a year of marriage, I was down to about $95,000. That was $35,000 in 12 months. $3,000 a month, give or take, more than my pension brought in. I wasn't stupid. I could see the trajectory. At this rate, my savings would be gone in 3 years. But I kept telling myself it was temporary. That once Mark found work and Maria's husband came back and Jen graduated, the demands would ease off. That this was just a rough patch. Family helping family through hard times. When I flew back to New Zealand for a visit, my mates asked how married life was treating me. I showed them photos of the family, the new roof, Althea in her school uniform, told them about being part of something bigger than myself, about finally having purpose and family. They exchanged looks. That knowing look that said they thought I was being taken for a ride but were too polite to say it directly. "You're sure about this, mate?" one of them finally asked. "That's a lot of money you're sending over." I got defensive, told them they didn't understand Filipino culture. That family obligation was different here. That extended family support was normal, expected, not manipulation. That Western individualism wasn't the only valid way to live. That real partnership meant taking care of each other's families. "Not everything is a scam," I said, probably too harshly. "Some of us are actually building real relationships based on mutual respect and love." They backed off, changed the subject. But I could see they thought I was a fool. An old fool who'd been taken in by a pretty face and a warm family and the promise of belonging. And maybe I was. But I didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to face the possibility that my second chance at happiness was just an expensive illusion. So I flew back to the Philippines, kept sending money, kept telling myself this was what family did. The guilt was real, though. The guilt of having money while they struggled. Maricel's father working his small plot of land in the heat for almost nothing. Her mother's hands worn from decades of washing clothes and cooking. Mark trying to find work, Maria's kids running around in worn-out clothes. The contrast between my comfortable retirement savings and their daily struggle for survival, it ate at me. Was it fair that I'd been born in New Zealand with opportunities they'd never have? That I could drop $6,000 on a roof without missing meals while they'd been sleeping under tarpaulins? That my biggest problem at their age had been whether Sarah would marry me, while they were wondering if they'd eat that day? Maricel framed it that way sometimes, very gently, not accusatory, just observational. "You're so lucky," she'd say. "Born in a rich country. We work so hard here, but it's never enough. That's why so many Filipinos work abroad. That's why we're grateful when someone like you cares about us." And I'd feel that familiar twist in my chest. Guilt and pride mixed together. Guilty for having so much. Proud to be sharing it. By month 12, I'd sent roughly $35,000 to Maricel and her family. My savings had dropped from $130,000 to $95,000. The monthly drain was $1,300 plus emergencies. I was running out of money faster than I'd planned, but I couldn't see how to stop without seeming heartless, without admitting that maybe my mates were right, without facing the possibility that I'd made a terrible mistake. So I kept sending money, kept telling myself it was temporary, kept believing I was building something real, and I kept checking my bank balance with increasing worry, watching the numbers drop month by month, wondering when it would stop, when things would finally stabilize, when we'd reach the point where we could just be a normal couple without constant financial emergencies. That point never came. But I didn't know that yet. What I did know was that I was tired. The stress of managing everyone's expectations, the constant requests, the guilt, the worry about money, it was wearing me down. I wasn't sleeping well, wasn't as happy as I'd been those first few months. But I loved Maricel. Or I thought I did. And I loved being part of a family. So I kept going. That's when Maricel said something that changed everything. You should learn proper Tagalog, mahal, if you really want to be part of the family. She said it casually one evening. We were having dinner at home. She'd cooked sinigang, I was working through a bowl of rice, and she just mentioned it like it was no big deal. You know what would be really special, mahal? If you learned proper Tagalog. Not just the basic phrases, but really learned it. I looked up from my food. I know a bit. You've taught me loads already. I know, and that's sweet. But I mean really learning it. Taking lessons. Most expats here never bother. They've been in the Philippines 10, 20 years and can barely order food in Tagalog. They treat it like a holiday, you know? Like they're just passing through. But you're different. You're part of the family now. She had that look on her face, that earnest, hopeful look that made me want to give her whatever she asked for. If you really learned Tagalog, she continued, you could talk to my father properly, understand my mother's stories, be part of the conversations at family gatherings instead of just sitting there smiling while we all speak around you. It would mean so much to them, to me. My pride stung a bit, I'll admit. I'd thought I was doing all right with the language. But she was right. I only knew basic phrases. When the family got together and started talking fast, mixing Tagalog and Visayan, I was completely lost. I'd sit there with a stupid smile on my face, nodding at what seemed like appropriate moments, hoping I wasn't agreeing to something ridiculous. And the idea appealed to me. Learning the language would prove I was serious. That I wasn't like those other expats she talked about, the ones who'd been in Dumaguete for years but couldn't be bothered to integrate. The ones who lived in expat bubbles, only ate Western food, only socialized with other foreigners. I'd always looked down on those blokes a bit, seemed disrespectful to live in a country without trying to understand it. You're right, I said. I should learn properly. Do you know anyone who teaches? Maricel lit up. I can ask around. There's probably someone at the university who does private tutoring. But here's the thing, and I don't know why I did this. Looking back, I decided to keep it secret. I got this idea in my head that I'd surprise everyone, that I'd show up at the Christmas family gathering in December and suddenly start speaking fluent Tagalog, and everyone would be amazed, delighted, proud of Kuya Grant for making the effort. So when Maricel found me a tutor, a retired English teacher named Mrs. Reyes, who also taught Tagalog to foreigners, I told Maricel I'd think about it, then secretly contacted Mrs. Reyes myself and set up lessons. 3 times a week, 500 pesos an hour. That's about 16 New Zealand dollars per session. Cheap as chips, really. I told Maricel I was going to coffee shops to meet other expats, to get out of the apartment for a bit. She seemed happy I was making friends. Instead, I was in Mrs. Reyes's small apartment near the university, drilling pronunciation, learning grammar, memorizing vocabulary. She was a good teacher, patient but firm. She'd rap my knuckles with a ruler when I got lazy with my pronunciation, just like teachers did when I was a kid. I threw myself into it the same way I'd once perfected my sourdough starter. Obsessively, methodically, determined to get it right. Flashcards everywhere. Audio lessons playing while I walked around Dumaguete. I'd practice pronunciation in the shower, conjugate verbs while watching rugby matches. Mrs. Reyes said I was a good student, that I had an ear for languages, which was news to me. After 4 months of intensive lessons, I wasn't fluent by any stretch, but I was conversational. I could follow basic discussions, understand context, pick up the gist of conversations even when people spoke quickly. And that's when everything started to get strange. The financial pressure hadn't let up, you understand. In those 4 months of language study, the money kept flowing out. A cousin's wedding, 15,000 pesos for an appropriate gift. That's about 500 New Zealand dollars. A nephew's graduation, 8,000 pesos. The house in the province needed repairs again. 25,000 pesos for something with the plumbing. Medical bills, always medical bills. Someone's tooth, someone's stomach, someone's vague ailment that required expensive tests. My savings were down to $73,000. I was stressed, sleeping poorly, but telling myself it was temporary. Maricel was still affectionate, still grateful. She'd thank me constantly, pray for me, tell me I was her blessing. I kept studying Tagalog, kept planning my big reveal at Christmas. I imagined their faces when I started speaking. The pride, the joy, the validation that I'd really committed to being part of the family. But then one afternoon I was in our apartment, supposedly watching telly while Maricel was in the bedroom on the phone with her sister Maria. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, not really. I was just there. The door was open, and she was speaking Tagalog, assuming I couldn't understand. I heard her say, "Hanggang kailan natin siya pahihigan?" I froze. My Tagalog wasn't perfect, but I knew those words. Hanggang kailan meant how long. Siya was him. Paghihigane took me a second, but then I placed it from higayan, to milk. As in milking a cow. How long can we milk him for? I sat there, rugby match playing on my laptop, blood pounding in my ears, told myself I'd misheard. My Tagalog wasn't that good. The word probably meant something else in context. Could be a figure of speech I didn't understand yet. But my hands were shaking. Maria said something I didn't catch. Maricel laughed and responded. I couldn't hear it clearly, but caught Kuya Grant and May Parapa. Still has money. I turned up the volume on my laptop, pretended to be absorbed in the match. When Maricel came out a few minutes later, I smiled at her like normal. She smiled back, asked if I wanted tea, kissed the top of my head. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I'd misunderstood, that Filipino conversations about family finances were probably different from Western ones. Maybe it was normal to strategize about how to approach wealthy family members for help. But I started listening more carefully after that. At a family gathering in the province the next week, I was sitting on the porch with a red horse, while the family prepared food inside. Maricel's mother was talking to Mark in Tagalog, assuming I was out of earshot or couldn't understand anyway. I heard her say, "Pagod na yung kano, kailangan natin mag-ingat." The foreigner is getting tired, we need to be careful. Mark laughed. Buti na lang may emergency palagi. Good thing there's always an emergency. They both laughed at that. Then Mark's wife said something about Christmas coming up, expectations about gifts, making sure they didn't push too hard too fast. I sat there in the heat, beer going warm in my hand, feeling sick to my stomach. But I didn't confront them. Didn't say anything. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was misunderstanding context, reading malice into innocent conversations. Maybe this was just how Filipino families talked about money and foreign relatives. Cultural difference, not deception. I kept studying Tagalog, kept listening. And the more I understood, the worse it got. Jen joking with Maria about Kuya Grant's bank when asking to borrow money. The cousins placing bets on how much longer I'd keep sending support before I woke up. References to someone named Jerome in conversations that would suddenly stop when I walked into a room. Jerome. Who the hell was Jerome? I started hearing that name more and more. Maricel on the phone. Hindi. See Jerome. Hindi. See Grant. No, Jerome, not Grant. Whispered conversations that went silent when I appeared. Knowing looks between family members when Jerome's name came up. One night, Maricel was in the shower and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at it. Message from Jay on Facebook Messenger. Preview said, "Miss ko na yung kain natin sa resort. I miss our meal at the resort." My hands started shaking again. The password to her phone was Althea's birthday. I'd seen Maricel enter it 100 times. Hadn't thought anything of it before. Why would I? We were married. I trusted her. But that message, that bloody message. I picked up the phone, entered the password. It unlocked. Scrolled through the messages with J. Jerome, I assumed. Flirtatious, recent. Lots of them. References to meeting up, to meals together, to missing each other. Nothing explicitly sexual, but clearly intimate. Familiar. The way people talk when they're more than friends. Nagawe bakayo ulit ing asawa mo. Did you fight with your husband again? Hindi. Mabait naman siya. Boring lang minsan. No, he's nice. Just boring sometimes. I heard the shower turn off. Put the phone down exactly where it had been. Lay back in bed. Pretended to be checking my own phone when she came out. "You okay, Mahal?" she asked, toweling her hair. "Yeah, just tired," I said. She climbed into bed, curled up next to me, fell asleep within minutes. I lay there in the dark for hours, heart pounding, mind racing. Who was Jerome? How long had this been going on? Was I reading too much into friendly messages? Or was I reading exactly as much as I should have been reading into them all along? The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I told Maricel I was going out to meet some expat friends for drinks. Instead, I went to a nearby coffee shop, sat there for an hour, then came back early. Our apartment was on the second floor. I could hear voices through the window before I even climbed the stairs. Maricel was on a video call, laughing. Really laughing in a way she didn't laugh with me anymore, unguarded, relaxed, genuinely happy. I crept up to the window, looked in. She was sitting on the couch with her laptop, talking to someone on video. A man. Young, maybe early 30s, Filipino. Handsome in that way that made my stomach drop because I knew, instantly, that this was Jerome. And I knew, instantly, what he meant to her. They were speaking Tagalog. And because I'd spent 4 months learning the language, because I'd wanted to prove I was different from other expats, because I'd worked so hard to understand, I understood every single word. "Kailan ka babalik dito?" When are you coming back here? I don't know. Grant's getting suspicious, I think. He's been weird lately. Pagod na ba siya? Is he tired already? Maricel laughed. That same laugh. My walking ATM with his boring bread stories. She said it in English, like she was quoting herself to someone else, then back to Tagalog, "Pero mabait naman, at mayaman." But he's nice and rich. Jerome asked, "Hanggang kailan mo siya tatagatagwin?" How long will you keep him strung along? Maricel shrugged on the video. "Hanggang maubos." Until it runs out. They both laughed at that. Laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. My entire life reduced to a punchline about an ATM with boring stories. I stood there outside my own apartment window, understanding every word, and felt my entire reality collapse. All those months of studying, all that effort to prove I was different, that I was committed, that I was worthy of belonging to this family, And the curse of it was that I'd succeeded. I'd learned the language. I understood perfectly. And what I understood was that I was a fool. I didn't go inside that night. Couldn't. I walked back down the stairs, went to a bar down by the boulevard, ordered a San Miguel, then another, then another. Sat there watching the sunset like I'd done with Maricel that first week, back when I thought I'd found something real. The bartender tried to make conversation, but I wasn't having it. Just sat there replaying those words in my head. My walking ATM. Hanggang maubos. Until it runs out. The laugh that followed. That genuine, unguarded laugh she'd never given me. I thought about all the conversations I'd overheard in the past few weeks. The ones I'd told myself I was misunderstanding. The ones I'd rationalized away as cultural differences or my imperfect Tagalog or paranoia brought on by stress. But I understood now. I understood perfectly. That was the curse of it. When I finally went back to the apartment around midnight, Maricel was asleep. I lay in bed next to her. This woman I'd married, this woman whose family I'd supported, whose life I'd tried to improve. This woman who called someone else and laughed about my boring stories while I paid for everything. I didn't sleep, just lay there planning what came next. The next morning I acted normal, made coffee, asked Maricel about her day, smiled when she kissed my cheek, but I was watching everything differently now, listening to everything with new ears. That afternoon, while she was out shopping, I went through her things properly. Not just the phone everything. Found receipts from restaurants I'd never been to. Found clothes I'd never seen her wear. Found photos on her laptop buried in folders, her and Jerome at places I recognized. The resort in Siquijor we'd talked about visiting but never had. A beach in Bohol. A hotel in Cebu. All dated. All during times I'd been back in New Zealand or busy in Dumaguete thinking she was running errands or visiting family. I found messages between her and Maria discussing strategies. How to space out requests. How to keep me feeling needed without pushing too hard. References to the investment paying off. Screenshots of my bank transfers shared with Maria and Jen, celebrating each one like lottery wins. The call center job she'd quit? I checked. Called the company using a number I found on her old payslips. No record of a Maricel working there in the past 3 years. The apartment she'd shared with her cousin? I asked around carefully. The cousin confirmed it. Maricel had borrowed the place for a few weeks to show me. She'd actually been living with her parents the whole time. Every piece of the life she'd shown me had been carefully constructed. A stage set designed to look like independence while actually demonstrating need. Designed to look like love while actually being a long-term extraction plan. I sat in our apartment that I was paying for, surrounded by the life I'd built that had never been real, and felt something break inside me that I don't think ever properly healed. But I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not until I had a plan. I went to see a lawyer in Dumaguete. Asked about my options. His answer was what I'd feared. The marriage was legal. I'd done everything by the book 130, a visa, marriage certificate, all registered properly, and the Philippines has no divorce. None. It's one of only 2 countries in the world without it, the other being Vatican City. The Catholic Church's influence runs deep here. My only option was annulment. That would cost between 300,000 and 800,000 pesos, somewhere between 10 and 26,000 New Zealand dollars. And it would take years, 2 to 5 years of legal proceedings, court appearances, paperwork. Or I could just leave. Stay married, but leave. But then Maricel could claim spousal support, could make my life hell from across the ocean. The lawyer was sympathetic, but realistic. This happens, he said, more often than you'd think. Foreign men, Filipino wives, families with expectations. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. What do most men do? I asked. Most just leave. cut their losses. Block everything and try to move on. The ones who fight, who try to get their money back or prove they were deceived, they usually spend more money and end up more miserable. I thanked him, paid his consultation fee. 3,000 pesos, about 100 New Zealand dollars. That night I confronted Maricel, but I didn't do it in English. I did it in Tagalog. She was cooking dinner. Adobo, my favorite. I walked into the kitchen and said in Tagalog, "Narinig kita kagabi, yung usap mo kay Jerome." I heard you last night. Your conversation with Jerome. The look on her face. Absolute shock. The spatula actually dropped from her hand and clattered on the floor. "Grant," she started in English, "naintindihan ko lahat," I continued in Tagalog. I understood everything. She switched to tears immediately. Started crying, saying in English that I'd misunderstood, that Jerome was just a friend, that I didn't understand Filipino, that I was taking things out of context, that she loved me, that how dare I spy on her. The tears were good, very convincing. Might have worked if I hadn't spent 4 months learning the language specifically to understand her better. "What call center?" I asked, still in Tagalog. "I called." "You never worked there." She stumbled. Started to explain, then changed tactics. Admitted it was her cousin's place she'd shown me, but that was just because she was embarrassed about living with her parents. It didn't mean anything. She'd been trying to seem more successful, more independent. Was that so wrong? And Jerome? He's nobody. A friend. You're being jealous and crazy. But she couldn't explain the messages, couldn't explain being caught laughing about me, couldn't explain the receipts and the photos. Within an hour, the family descended. Maricel had called them, crying, saying I was accusing her of terrible things. Her mother, her father, Mark, Maria, all showing up at our apartment. They weren't sympathetic anymore. The warmth was gone. Now I was the selfish Kano who didn't understand family obligations, who promised to take care of them, and now was backing out, who was breaking their daughter's heart with baseless accusations. "You said you were our blessing," Maricel's mother said. "You promised before God." That word again. Blessing. Like I'd signed a contract in the municipal hall that obligated me to fund them forever. I told them I was leaving, going back to New Zealand. That I was done. Maricel switched tactics again. Now she was sorry. Crying genuine tears, maybe. Said she'd made mistakes. That Jerome was nothing. That she'd end it. That the family pressure had been too much. She'd gotten caught up in it. But she loved me. Really loved me. Really loved me. Please don't go. Maybe some part of her even meant it. Maybe she did have feelings for me buried under the financial calculations and the family obligations and the boring Kano with his boring bread stories. But I was done. 4 months of learning Tagalog, and what I learned was that I'd been a fool from the start. I packed my things that night, took what I could carry, left the rest, booked a flight for 3 days later. Maricel cried, begged, then got angry, then threatened, said she'd claim spousal support, said I'd promised to support the family, said I couldn't just abandon them. I told her to do what she needed to do legally, but I was gone. I paid the lawyer to start annulment proceedings. 12,000 New Zealand dollars he eventually cost me by the time everything was processed. Took 18 months to finalize, because I wasn't in the country, and Maricel fought it at first, then eventually gave up when she realized I wasn't coming back. Maricel sent messages for months afterward, alternating between apologetic and threatening, saying she loved me, saying I owed her, saying the family was suffering, saying I was heartless, saying she'd made mistakes, but I should forgive her, saying Jerome meant nothing, saying she missed me, saying I was a terrible person. I blocked everything eventually. Phone, Facebook, email, all of it. Flew back to Christchurch with $58,000 less than I'd started with. plus the $12,000 for the annulment. $70,000 total to learn that my second chance at happiness had been a carefully orchestrated extraction operation. I'm living in a tiny flat now, half the size of what I had before, working part-time at a bakery because I have to. My retirement comfort is gone, my savings are gutted, my plan to travel, to enjoy my later years, to finally have some peace gone. My mates don't say, "I told you so," but their eyes do. That knowing look that says they saw it coming from the start. I'm 62 years old, working 3 a.m. shifts again, right back where I started, but $70,000 poorer and infinitely more cynical. And you know what the worst part is? Learning Tagalog. That's what did me in. If I'd stayed ignorant, if I'd kept smiling and nodding while they spoke around me, I might have been able to keep the fantasy going a bit longer, might have held on to the illusion that I was loved, that I belonged, that my money was helping family rather than funding an exploitation scheme with Jerome laughing in the background. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. I thought learning the language would prove I was special, that I was different from those other expats, that my love was deeper, more genuine, more worthy of being reciprocated. Turns out it just meant I got to understand exactly how they really saw me. Got to hear her laugh about my boring bread stories while calling me her walking ATM. Got to understand every word when she said, "Hanggang maubos," until it runs out. The precision I brought to baking, measuring exactly, following proven methods, paying attention to timing and temperature, I should have applied that same precision to my relationship, should have measured her responses more carefully, should have followed proven methods for evaluating whether someone loves you or your wallet, should have paid attention to the timing of requests and the temperature of her affection when money was tight versus flowing. Instead, I rushed in, ignored every warning sign. Let my loneliness and my desperation and my 61 years of failed relationships blind me to what was obvious to everyone else. I paid $70,000 to learn that sometimes the fantasy is all you're buying. That love can be faked convincingly enough to fool even a careful man if he wants to be fooled badly enough. That families can be transactional while performing warmth so well, you'll hand over your retirement savings with gratitude. And I paid to learn that understanding Tagalog doesn't make you special. It just means you get to hear exactly what they think of you when they assume you can't understand. Sweet as, right? That's what I used to say. Everything's sweet as, nothing's sweet about it now. That's my story. That's what $70,000 and 2 years of my life bought me. An education in what happens when loneliness meets opportunity, meets calculated exploitation. I want to be clear about something, though. This isn't about all Filipinas being scammers or all Filipino families being predatory. That's not what I'm saying. The Philippines has good people, genuine people, families with real needs and real love to give. I've met some of them since, here in Christchurch. Filipino nurses at the hospital, OFW workers sending money home, people building real lives. The problem is telling the difference. And the problem is that my loneliness made me ignore every warning sign that might have helped me tell the difference. Were some of the family's needs genuine? Probably. Poverty in the Philippines is real. Medical bills are expensive. Schools cost money. But somewhere along the line, genuine need became calculated exploitation. Or maybe it was calculated from the start, and I just didn't want to see it. I think about Maricel sometimes. Wonder if any of it was real for her. If she felt anything beyond seeing a solution to her family's financial problems. If she felt guilty about Jerome, about the lies, about the boring bread stories. Comment that still stings more than it should. But mostly I think about myself. about how a 61-year-old man who'd spent 40 years successfully running a business could be so completely fooled, about how the same precision and care I brought to baking, the measuring, the timing, the attention to detail, completely abandoned me when it came to the most important decision of my life. I think about the warning signs I ignored, Maricel's job that she couldn't really describe, the apartment that was actually her cousin's, the escalating requests that never stopped, my mates trying to warn me, the way I got defensive instead of curious. And I think about the language lessons, the irony of it. I wanted to prove I was different, that I cared enough to learn, that I was worthy of being part of the family. And what I learned was that I was never going to be part of the family. I was the investment, the walking ATM, the boring Kano with his boring bread stories and his useful bank account. Learning the language doesn't make you special, mate. It just means you get to understand exactly how they really see you. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. I could have spent another year, maybe two, thinking I was loved and building a life. Instead, I got to understand every word when they discussed how to maximize the extraction before I figured it out. The lesson I'm trying to share, if you're thinking about doing what I did, is this. Don't let loneliness make your decisions. Don't let desperation for connection override common sense. Don't move so fast that you can't see what's actually happening. And if you do go to the Philippines, if you do meet someone, if you do start a relationship, watch the pattern of requests. Watch how money gets talked about. Watch whether love and financial need are constantly intertwined, because they shouldn't be. Not like that. Not in a healthy relationship. I'm not saying never give money to help. I'm saying watch for the pattern. Watch for the script. Watch for whether you're building something together or just funding an endless series of emergencies that never quite resolve. Take your time. Don't marry someone you've only spent 2 months with. Don't commit your retirement savings without seeing how things actually work long term. Don't ignore your friends when they're concerned. And for God's sake, don't think learning the language makes you immune to being exploited. Sometimes the fantasy is all you're buying. And that's an expensive lesson to learn. Sweet as E.S. Grant's story is a harsh reminder that cultural immersion and language learning, while valuable, don't protect you from exploitation. In fact, they can make the betrayal cut deeper understanding. The language meant understanding exactly how he was seen. The Philippines has genuine, loving people and families with real needs, but it also has those who've turned foreign relationships into calculated financial strategies. Learning to distinguish between the two requires time, skepticism, and boundaries, things Grant's loneliness wouldn't allow him. If you're considering a relationship in the Philippines, remember, love shouldn't require constant emergency payments. Family obligation is real here, but so is manipulation. And sometimes the best translation of "I love you" is "show me your bank balance." Thanks for watching Inside the Philippines. Hit subscribe for more cautionary tales, and remember, some lessons cost more than others. Until next time, stay aware.